Welcome to EduCasts, home of EduCasters. As you can imagine, this philosophy has its fair share of critics. For many, perennialism isn't just old-fashioned, it's deeply problematic. The critiques generally fall into three categories. First, it's elitist and anti-democratic. This is the charge that perennialism is an education for the thinking class, not for the working class. The Paideia proposal tried to fight this, but the criticism sticks. Is it really true that every student wants or needs to read Moby Dick? What about the student who wants to be a great carpenter, chef, or electrician? Critics argue that by dismissing vocational education, perennialism devalues the dignity of real work and the skills that most people actually use to build a life and a society. It can come across as incredibly snobby, suggesting that the only life worth living is the life of the mind. Second, it's hopelessly impractical. This is the big, obvious complaint. We live in a complex, specialized, technological world. How, exactly, does reading 14th-century Italian poetry help the student become a nurse, a software engineer, or a data analyst? In a globally competitive economy, parents and politicians want to see a clear return on their educational investment. They want schools to produce graduates who can get high-paying jobs and contribute to the economy. Perennialism's stubborn refusal to engage with this practical world makes it seem like a luxury we just can't afford. Finally, and perhaps most powerfully, it is deeply Eurocentric and culturally blind. This is the dead white guy's problem. Look at the traditional great books list. It is overwhelmingly composed of works by white, male, European authors. The perennialist claim to be teaching universal and timeless. Truths rings hollow when those truths seem to have been discovered almost exclusively by one tiny fraction of the human race. What about the great books of Africa, Asia, or Latin America? What about the profound philosophical and literary traditions from China, India, or the Islamic world? What about the voices of women who were shut out of the great conversation for centuries? Critics argue that perennialism isn't universal at all. Instead, it's a tool for preserving the cultural and intellectual power of one specific tradition while ignoring or dismissing all others. A true perennialist, of course, has answers to these charges. To the charge of being impractical, they offer their strongest defense. They would say that nothing is more practical than a trained mind. Job skills are fleeting. The ability to think is forever. A person who has spent 12 years learning how to analyze a text, build a logical argument, and spot a fallacy is a person who will be a better manager, a better citizen, a better problem solver, and a better parent. They argue that this is the ultimate transferable skill, and that vocational training is, in the long run, the most impractical education of all because it prepares you for a world that will be gone in a decade. To the elitist charge, they'd point to Adler. Adler's entire Paideia project was based on the democratic belief that all people are rational and therefore all people deserve this education, to give one group of students, usually the poor, job training and another group, usually the rich, a thinking education is, to a perennialist, the most anti-democratic and unjust thing a school can do. The Eurocentric charge is the trickiest one for them. Adler himself, later in life, agreed that the great conversation should be expanded to include more voices. The true principle of perennialism, seeking out the best and most profound articulations of timeless truths, doesn't have to be limited to Europe. A modern perennialist could and should argue for a great books list that includes Confucius, the Upanishads, and Toni Morrison, right alongside Plato and Shakespeare. Today, you don't see perennialism as the guiding philosophy of most public schools. Our system is a messy, pragmatic mix of progressivism, group projects, social-emotional learning, and essentialism, standardized testing, STEM focus. But perennialism is far from dead. You see its DNA in the classical school movement in many private and charter schools, and in the core curriculums of universities like Columbia, St. John's College, and Hutchins' own University of Chicago. Perennialism remains a powerful, troubling, and inspiring challenge to our modern way of life. It forces us to stop and ask the most fundamental question: what are we doing and why? It stands as a permanent argument against the easy answer. In a world that prizes speed, convenience, and a quick return on investment, Perennialism asks us to slow down and value what is difficult, deep, and permanent. In a world that is obsessed with the new, it asks us to respect the old. And in a culture that often seems to value feelings over facts, it makes the radical claim that the purpose of education is not to validate our feelings, but to guide our reason toward the truth. We may never fully adopt its unyielding, single-minded vision, but its core challenge will and should remain. School will always be about preparing us for a job, but perennialism will always be there to remind us that we are more than our jobs. We are human beings, and the most important work we will ever do is the work of building a thoughtful, rational, and virtuous soul.